Welcome to the PahRooZings Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back. We are once again extremely excited to not only be nearing the end here of season 2, but to take a slightly different format, and we're kind of calling it the PahRooZings Pub Chats. Just getting a couple peers together, sharing some of those memorable experiences that have been had along the yellow brick road of valuation and appraisal experience from however we started to wherever we got to. I am thrilled today to have Rick Gary and Stacy Caprioli joining me. And as always, before we get too far into this, I just want to say thanks to Wade and to Trevor, to Jenny, and to Nagla, all of which reaching out. Great feedback. Love the encouragement and suggestions. And as always, thank you for generously sharing this. Right now, before we even get into it, make sure to hit that like and share button and continue to spread the love of PahRooZings, the power of values. With that, welcome, Rick. Welcome, Stacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So good. So happy to be back.
Oh, it's so exciting, so much fun. I only wish we were sitting together in person and had a cold beverage. I'll enjoy my tap water, but cheers to you all while we're here.
Yeah, same. I'm still drinking coffee in the afternoon, so I tell you how my day has gone.
Oh, I can appreciate that coming off a little holiday weekend. That Tuesday showed up like a fierce Monday, to say the least. Definitely the case there. Well, for this end of season kind of pub chats episode, we thought it would be interesting to ask that question that so many of us have experienced at some point, or maybe answered for a friend or a loved one, which is, so when did you really know that you either wanted to be in the industry or that like you're in this industry? Like this is just a set of who you are. And to try to lead by example this time, a lot of times I always defer to the guest. But I know for me, one of those defining experiences was I was in the process of buying. It was either, I don't know which property it was, one of my early properties. I had a full-time job, and back then, this shows a little bit of timing and age, you could choose your own appraiser. In addition to choosing your own mortgage broker and your title person, you could choose your own closing company, and you could choose every single part, choose your own home inspector. You know, these days, that's not so much the case. But I remember Mick was the gentleman, and we were having a conversation, and he had shared with me that he and his brother were second generation appraisers, and they'd taken over their dad's business, and he was expanding and he needed some help growing his business, and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to help him out. And I told him, I don't really have an interest in doing whatever it is that you do. I like investing. I like owning investment property. I like rental income. I like tenants putting, the idea of pillow money. They're stuffing my pillow a little bigger each day of the month so that it helps me not only pay the mortgage, but help pay down that balance. It increased the equity, and over time, it's a win-win. And I went and met with him, and he shared with me what back then was a DOS-based MLS. And I literally was like a kid in a candy store. I'm like, are you kidding me? You get this? He's like, oh yeah, this is how we do appraisal. I'm like, I don't know about appraisal, but I mean, from an investing standpoint and access to data and the ability to compare and contrast properties and geographic areas and types and rent ranges. And he goes, Michael, that's what we do as an appraiser. He's like, what'd you think I did? I'm like, I don't know, and didn't care, because I just went to the bank and I knew I'd need to put down about 20% or so and buy a place, and they would approve me for a mortgage, and I'd buy an investment property. And that's when I was like, man, this appraisal stuff, there's something to it. So that was when that first, as you would say, kid in the candy store moment showed up for me. How about you, Stacey?
That is a great question. I think that I have so many moments over my career that I look at that could be defining moments, or they could just be places where I've pivoted. But I would say that probably the biggest moment for me, and I think I mentioned this when we had spoke prior, was doing risk pool valuations around the country. And I was in a small town in Oregon, and I went in and I was doing all of their valuations on all of their properties in this small town. So all of the parks, structures, the library, the city hall, everything like that. Took all of my pictures, collected all of my data, went back to, the Portland area, and was in my hotel room, and a storm hit, and this entire small town flooded completely. And I had been the last person to step foot in these buildings where I was photographing and collecting data. And I had, day before data on these structures. And I jumped on my computer and I started plugging in data and getting values. And I compiled everything that night. And the thought to me was, being a part of this industry, I can help. I can get them insurance values quicker. I have everything that they need to really start their claims on this because they flooded. And it really just showed me that this industry is just about helping one another. And I just was like, this is it. I'm in. Like, that's it forever. So, that's probably what I would say was the biggest turning point for me, is being able to help an entire community, which was huge.
I mean, that is so amazing. You were essentially a mobile version of the Smithsonian for that town.
That's an interesting way to put it, but I like it.
Yeah. I mean, for probably a number of those property owners, they had no documentation what the before condition was compared to the after. And that ability to really support ultimately what would be their claim and hopefully significant compensation to help rebuild or reconstruct their damaged property then. Wow, what a phenomenal experience, Stacy.
Yeah, that was great.
Did they give you a gold star?
No,
they should have.
I wish someone would.
We'll send you one. Maybe that's what we're going to start doing, having gold stars.
Gold
stars. Rick, how about you?
Well, I feel bad because, you guys have impactful stories and aha moments. Mine is a little different, and kind of seems a little selfish, but I remember, when I was first started appraising, went to work for, a appraisal company back in rural Missouri, and we started going out, I love the outdoors, I love doing things, and they did a lot of rural, properties. And, the first time that I got to go out and spend, half a day to a day just walking, a 500 acre parcel, seeing, everything that out there, saw deer, turkey, and collecting all this data, that was probably my first, I really enjoyed this, I get to see things. And then, when we started going in, more residential and houses and just seeing all the different types of, like you're walking through as a buyer, you see, oh man, that's neat. I would enjoy that. I would like that. Those were probably my first, this is, my industry. But then a little later, a few years later, our company brought in another, new person off street, had no idea what they were doing. And I got to experience the training aspect with them. And, when you realize that, how much today versus what you knew 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's so amazing. That's the first time that I had really thought about it and realized how much I had learned in, a 3-year period. And, there's been steps like that over my career where I'm like, man, I'm so lucky I didn't get into trouble, way back when, but realizing that the first time is that, I'm an expert in something, I really am. I know more than, the average person on a subject, because I've always been a, jack of all trades, master of none. So yeah, those are, a couple of my more important, realizations in my career.
I think you share one that many of us have heard from time to time, that jack of all trades, master of none at times, until we end up in a circumstance that we, as you touched on, Rick, that we are able to hopefully succinctly and maybe with some appropriate simplicity describe or even walk through a challenging circumstance that other people are just befuddled by. And then you get to the end of it and you're like, did I do that? I'm like, oh my goodness, I did that. Like, you did that. It wasn't just, you didn't just go to Google like, oh, hey, Google, how do we do this?
Yeah.
That's a phenomenal type of thing. Stacy, when you look back and you've had, like Rick, so many interesting and different experiences along the way, which was one of those assignments? And you're like, either when you got done with the assignment, you appreciated that you got through it, but you may have hated it in the process, or you just didn't like it at any point in time and still don't like it now. But it was one of those, you learned so much from it. What's one of those that come to mind?
Oh, man.
I know just one. You know, it's hard to kind of choose.
Like, which one was the most challenging? I have so many that I just think back, and I think back on it fondly because I'm like, this taught me. Otherwise, I would not be where I am. But I had one that was on a burial ground that we had to, take that into account. Any historic property has always been a huge challenge because it just really depends on that district and how they categorize everything. So that's always been a big lesson learned. I'd say some of the larger scale stuff I've done, I was doing evaluation on a power plant in Ohio, and it was like a whole different ballgame for me. This was equipment I had never set eyes on at all. And that was probably the most challenging, that really pulled me out of my comfort zone, is having to look at things from, almost an engineering standpoint, which is definitely not my background. So that kind of pulled me out and pushed me out of my comfort zone a little bit. But, there's so many that can really establish those challenges, but also learning advantages.
No, I definitely appreciate that. Rick, how about you? I mean, you touch on that value of the rural experience. And depending on what part of the country you're in, that's rural or rural. I mean, it's just any of those are all the same word, just in case people were wondering. I'll help kind of cue it up a little for you there.
So the one that I remember most, I worked in an office and I did mainly, residential work, up to 20 acres. We did have a commercial side and an ag side, and, I'd help with those, but my primary focus was residential. And we did one, I remember, it was a non-traditional ag lender, and they were doing a house on 20 acres, should be pretty easy. Get out there and there's a cell tower on it. And they provide me the lease on this thing, and it was insane. And it transferred. It was a 30-year lease, and it was interesting because I remember it was one particular carrier, but other carriers could have their antennas on the pole, and with each one, it added additional income. And so they had enough on there. I mean, they were making, I remember right, it was $75,000 a year just on the lease on this.
And what year is this, to kind of give some perspective?
98, 99.
Oh my goodness. Sorry. I mean, that's a lot of money anyway. That's a significant amount of money 25 years ago.
And I was a, fifth, 6th year appraiser. I'd done a lot of residential. I had no idea what to do with this, but having to, getting to be able to go to the commercial guys and do the true income approach and how much that lease was worth, and put that all together in an appraisal for this, so that, the bank was happy, the people got, a fair value. It was just, it was very unique in the approach, and something that I look back fondly on is that really taught me to think outside the box, because especially in residential appraising, most everything is tried to be put into a box. And it gave me the ability to then, just to kind of carry the story forward. I had a house with a flat roof in the little town that I was in. Well, there was no other places with flat roofs, So how do you do that? Well, thinking outside the box, because I'd worked on this other thing, I knew I could take different approaches. I looked historically at the last sale of that property, how that was impacted, what the percentage was. And then I went to other small towns and found a percentage and reconciled it all. The impact on value was between 10 and 12% across the board. And I had all of that data. And, it was just to be able to have that kind of experience and be able to think outside the normal box and support your conclusion. And that was the one that really kicked off my thinking outside the box in appraising.
I love that. That is such a wonderful touch point that we can easily lose sight of if we're in either a narrow either market area or a particular similarity of assignments. And you talk about, it's one thing to talk about, thinking outside the box or being outside the box. It's another to literally be outside the box.
Yeah.
Like 20-acre parcel, there's a home on it. This is typical in this area. And you're like, and there's a tower. And then to make matters more challenging, because of the age of that lease, it was common then that the additive receivers on that structure actually accrued to the owner and not to the lessor of the tower. Or in this case, the lessee of the tower, who controls all the rights and then has all the expansion abilities. I mean, what a phenomenal experience.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Odd.
Yeah. Did you at least erect a cell tower where you're at now so you can generate some additional income?
Oh my gosh, I looked for land where I thought that they might build one, and thought about purchasing. You know, I looked, well, there's one here, and maybe this far down the road they'll want to build one right off the highway. Is that 5 acres for sale? You know, yeah. I was looking, because when I saw how much money they were making, I was like, well, I wouldn't even have to work if I get enough of those. Get 2 or 3 of those, I'm set. But was never able to pinpoint exactly where they might want to build, and you know, times change, you know, and yeah, that's true.
I love what you touch on there, and that's been one of the interesting conversations over the years that I've had an opportunity to hear from others, and that is, here's this situation, this opportunity, this property type, maybe it's a neighborhood, whatever it might be. Like, wow, that's a real investment opportunity. Now, whether or not you're able to take advantage of it or the conditions are right, it's another thing. But I mean, Rick, you touched on it there. For you, it was maybe cell towers. I mean, Stacy, you've been around a lot of real estate, and there's a lot else that goes on. You know, maybe people are not as aware of. What kind of things have you all come across over the years that you've at least considered? Maybe you've taken action on it, maybe you haven't. But you're like, oh, that one's interesting.
Yeah, I think, well, I know we had talked a little bit about this, about the investment piece, and we do invest in apartment complexes. And that was really, in the beginning of my career, that was kind of a different anomaly for me. Like multi-family apartment complexes, that was more so on the outskirts of what I was doing. I was either doing, you know, the heavy commercial side of it, where I was doing the inspections, or I was doing the residential. So when I started getting into the apartment complexes and really looking at the differences of 8 families and 12 families and 64 units and really about, you know, the cost of every door, that really sparked a different interest. And I know for us, it's a family business that we invest in these properties, because I think as you are immersed in this world as an appraiser, you just start really enjoying real estate to an extent where it's like all you talk about with your spouse.
Are you saying that's a bad thing?
No,
I mean, that sounds. I mean, that is sexy. I mean, I know we don't exactly associate this podcast with sexy, but I got to tell you, Stacy, for a lot of people listening, that sounds very sexy.
Yeah. So I would say apartment complexes is probably the biggest one that has always stood out. You know, I think conversions of buildings too has always really intrigued me, and I haven't really dabbled in that yet, but I see some of these conversions from, you know, an older schoolhouse into condominiums, or, you know, something where they're really taking a piece of history and a really solidly built building, and they're making it into something that's modern. That intrigues the heck out of me. I mean, I think that the people that can design these and, you know, put them out into the market are just really doing something awesome to kind of establish that historical part of, you know, communities and keep that there, but also just modernize and keep us moving forward. So that's something that always interested in me for the future.
Oh, I appreciate that. For Stacy, for you and maybe your household, did valuation come first, or did investing come first?
For me, it was valuation, for sure. Valuation first, and then investing second. I know a lot of people do it the other way. They start getting into investments, and then they think, oh, this is kind of interesting. I want to know how to put a value on all of this stuff, and they kind of start to dabble in that. But for us, it was valuation first, and then investing second.
Oh, I love that. Rick, did you ever take the plunge after you didn't find 5 acres of land to put some cell towers on with any investing?
I'm not. I've always thought about it, but I've, you know, been pretty conservative, and you know, there's been many a time where I've thought that'd be a great investment and just couldn't pull the trigger because of the risk. You know, it's like everything, risk reward, and I am not a risk taker.
That's okay. I mean, in some cases, that's probably a better thing.
I look back and question that, if I'd have taken a few more risks, where would I be today? So, but yeah, I've never gotten into that. I've been parts of it, with people who do it and, ask opinions and whatnot. Never did take the dive.
I appreciate that. I can recall a time, as Stacy touched on, where there was one, I got access to that DOS-based version of the MLS. I thought was the best thing. I mean, sliced bread, get away from me. I mean, this was phenomenal. And I was working on one assignment. There was we call them a 2-flat in the Chicago market where I was at the time. So it's a vertical building that had a first floor apartment. Second floor apartment was the exact same floor plan as the first floor apartment, had an unfinished basement. And I showed up. I remember the gentleman's name was Mario. There for the appraisal. It was a purchase, or he was the seller. He's the guy who bought it and rehabbed it and was selling it. And he's the one who was letting me through the building as part of a purchase appraisal for his buyer. And just got to chatting with him, of course, just in the process of just the things we're supposed to do. He'd tell me about the property. I did a little research. I see what it looks like now. What did it really look like beforehand? Because back then there were no photos on the DOS-based internet. There was just some words. And I'm like, how much did you spend? And he shared with me his budget. He walked me through it. And I'm like, wait a minute, like you bought this for like around 100, maybe 105 or so. And you put 25 into it and you're selling it for 200. He goes, yeah, is that bad? I'm like, absolutely not. I'm like, that's worth more than most people make in a year in my world. I'm like, that's amazing. I'm like, do you do this often? He goes, I try to do, at least 1 or 2 a quarter. I'm like, if you told me 1 a year, that would be amazing. Like you're doing 1 or 2 a quarter. I'm like, I'm intrigued. He goes, well, give it a shot. And as I was doing the research on that property, there was a property on the block that was listed for 125, and I bought it. And 3029 was one of those investment properties that I bought. Probably spent more than he did. It cost me probably 30 or 35 to turn it around. And I'm a big fan of rental income, so I just kept it for rental. And went to the bank. They gave me takeout funding. And, put a 30-year mortgage against it. Now, that might have been a commercial one at that point. I don't remember which. But I was like, this is the best. I'm like, talk about that whole concept of value add. I didn't know what value add was back then. And so, Stacy, I imagine you've probably done a good bit of value add over the years.
Yeah, a little bit here and there. And, you talk about the kind of the concept of the fix and flip. And that, to me, we've dabbled in a little bit of that, too. And so it's interesting because you can make it or you break it on any property. But you have to just be really smart about, the fixtures that you're putting in and, your costs up front. And it's really interesting to see a property change from one thing to another. And then we just became flip failures because we bought our house and we're like, we're going to flip this house. We just never left. So, it just depends on what you kind of run into. But that was back in the day when, there was a website that you could go on and just bid for any property, and they don't do that anymore. So it's a little bit more challenging to find those fix and flips. But the rentals are really a near and dear to our process.
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. I recall over the years there have been a number of times where for completely, it was spontaneity. It was total serendipity where an assignment, I was working on a particular assignment with obviously someone who I'd never met before. That's typically the way the appraisal assignments go. And the results of what we were doing were so impactful for a client. For me, like 2 come to mind right now. And on the surface of it, like neither one of them, like they were not necessarily complex assignments. They weren't necessarily anything unusual, but the circumstances, that story, if you will, of the, in this case, someone involved in the transaction, many times the property owner, was just such a touching experience for me. And I sense probably you all have had that as well. And I'd love to hear maybe what might come to mind. One of those times where as a result of the work that you did, it so helped or ingratiated or resolved the matter or freed somebody up or whatever it might be. Stacy, does something like that come to mind?
Yeah, definitely. And I love these stories. I had done a cash out refinance on not a complex property, pretty basic property. And they were refinancing to get cash out to send their first child to college. And there had been no one else in their family that had ever gone to college, and they made it very clear, that was their purpose of their cash out. And I just remember when everything was all said and done, I got a phone call from, that borrower, and they just said, like, you helped us build this dream for our children. And it was like, well, that's why I'm in it right there. I mean, whatever the purpose is, why somebody is refinancing or buying or transitioning to something in their life, it just hit me. It was like they needed that aspect from me as my profession in order to get their child into college. And it just, it hits you, and then you become a valuation nerd, and you're just stuck in it forever.
Oh, I love that. Rick, what kind of story comes to mind for you over the years?
Well, I was appraising in Florida, and it's a little unique because, you meet people every day in our business, new people, new homes, everything. And I had one in particular was a purchase, and it was a young couple, just had their first child, buying their first home, really didn't know what they were doing. They actually weren't even using a realtor. They found this house, they put a offer on it, said, this is what we want. And unfortunately, the house really wasn't worth what they were paying for it. Had several long conversations with them, the lender, the seller, going through this. And I said, I just don't have the data. I'm not saying it's not worth it. I just don't have the data to show this is, what it's worth. And it was well overpriced. So, well,
not just overpriced, it was worth it.
Fuel fell through, and they ended up going, finding a new home with a realtor, and it was better than what they looked for. And I got a call from them about 8 months later. They were getting ready to have their second child, and they just wanted to say thank you. They didn't get upside down on the house. That house was actually still on the market for about 10% less than what they had offered on it. So, it's one of those where nobody was happy with me to begin with, but, after time and it got to percolate, and they got to see, it really, kept them from making, that house decision is the biggest decision you're going to make. One of the biggest investments you're going to ever make. And you hate to see people get, into something like that, just by what we do. It was nice to actually get that validation because we don't get that often. And honestly, that's the only time that I got.
Stacy, Rick doesn't get that validation often. Is that?
I wouldn't say that I disagree with him on that, but, he kind of summed it up when he said, like, they might be mad at us up front. That kind of seems to be the appraiser badge that we wear. Not everything is going to be pleasant up front, but I think ultimately it's our job to keep that public trust. And eventually down the road, like you're saying, Rick, they realized what, you helped them do. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I love that. And that is such an important reminder, especially for those that are listening that may be newer to the industry or considering getting into the industry from whatever you're doing now, because it is a fascinating industry and there's so many interesting property types to be associated with, so many interesting areas that you can do appraisal in or with, so many different just broad range of assignments. But that hey, you made a difference, or that thank you, those definitely few and far between. I'm not going to say it's a 4-leaf clover, but let's just say it's a big clover patch. Is all I'm kind of thinking about there from that standpoint. Wow, that's amazing. One of the other fascinating things that many who have started out in a local type appraisal experience, and both of you have, although you may not know this as much about each other, but you both have had that experience of starting out in a more local experience, and then through a series of developing yourself, stepping out for opportunities, gotten to a point in the industry and in your profession where you get to influence a lot of people now. When you think back, was there a particular role from that first day that you got introduced to appraisal until now that really was as they would say, putting the jetpack on you as a professional and really help advance your career significantly from a personal development standpoint?
Yeah. I think during, the Fannie Mae repurchase period, and I was working for a company called Opus, and we were doing repurchase reviews. And during that time, it really became clear to me that, there was such a shift in this industry. And from what I was doing to where I felt I wanted to be, just completely pivoted. And that was really when, the pursuit of my license began, and, really hitting the ground running and taking all of that field experience and turning it into my license, because I just felt like there was a problem then. And, it happened, and there has been a lot of stuff to correct it since. And it's just my goal to keep this industry moving forward. And I felt like at that time, I felt there was a call for appraisers, and I wanted to be one of them. So I would say during that position, I was there for about 3 years, and it really just taught me pretty much everything I needed to know about the ins and outs of the industry and how to navigate it. And it really changed the trajectory of everything for me.
Rick, anything like that come to mind for you?
Yeah. Well, when we spoke the first time, I kind of told you I've only worked for 3 companies in my, entire career.
Stacy, he's only worked for 3 companies.
Probably.
So,
Well, I think that was such, that's great. I give you so much credit. I've been bouncing around.
well, after the first company I worked for, the local company, I went to a large national company, and not having a lot of experience, they put me in charge of, Central Florida, in Orlando. I'm all of a sudden running an office, hiring trainees. And it didn't take me long to realize that is where I wanted to be. I'd had enough experience at that time that, I was starting to get my feet under me, understanding, different things. And with this company, I'd been in Las Vegas for a year after rural Missouri, go to Las Vegas. And, it was a completely different animal. And then coming to Florida was a completely different animal. So getting that broad spectrum really made me see the bigger picture of appraising and, what was possible. And then when we started bringing on the trainees and even some of the certified appraisers that had been in the market, 2 or 3 years into the fold, and I was getting to work with them, I thought, this is my sweet spot. I'm not meant to be out in the field. I'm not meant to be doing the same thing over and over, day after day. I am meant to help these people, understand when they get into complex issues, thinking outside the box, teaching them. And, I had really thought maybe an instructor role, but I don't think that I would ever be that structured to be able to, be an instructor, but just working on them on actual cases that they're working on. That I think that's where my sweet spot came in, is that this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing, doing that on a day-to-day basis. Because as you'll do 10 appraisals and one of them will be, have issues that you got to deal with. On that position, that's all I was dealing with, and I really, I enjoyed that aspect. As we said last time, I was never putting the boilerplate together, same thing day after day. As different and as much change as there is in appraisal when you're doing residential, you can go for weeks and it seems like you have not done anything different in the last 3 weeks. You're doing the same thing, so being able to have that, working on those different types of things, I knew that that's where I needed to be and that's where I wanted my career to go. And without being an instructor, I'm able to touch a lot of appraisers and, help them in specific situations rather than, trying to, groom somebody from the ground up. That takes too long for me. I want to help them today.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Stacy, I know that's something you've shared a lot about as well, and you regularly share about that similar desire, not only to contribute, but that 1 + 1 = 3.
Right. Yeah, I think, you really touched on kind of having that feeling of, wanting to teach and wanting to educate and wanting to guide. And I think that's a huge part of this industry for me, is that, I want to assist and help And that's just truly who I am. And this profession allows me to do it. It always has. I mean, I've been kind of the rolling stone gathers no moss. I have worked at more than 3 companies, but I've learned something from every single one that, I have taken away and I've used it to help other people. And that's always been my goal, is that this industry gets larger and more diverse, and we just keep going, and we have just so much structure. And I think, mentoring is a huge part of what we do as appraisers and how we just keep our profession alive.
Well, I'm going to add on that, because I think you're 100% right there in that, to have somebody in a position like what I'm in today. And when I was 2 or 3, I touched on, man, I'm lucky I didn't do something to in my career a few years ago, because I didn't know what I didn't know, and that's where, our mentorship helps, being available to, both of us, the amount of appraisers that we are available to and touch on a daily basis, on a yearly basis, goes far beyond the, sitting in class or looking at a webinar or whatnot. When we get to work with them on a complex deal, walk them through it, get them to understand it, be able to share that knowledge that they've not got, and that they will now have and can apply to a different situation. And I know that they'll carry that knowledge into their next assignment or the one a year from now, and they can come back to this teaching moment and apply that. Is, that makes it special to me, is that when I can hear and see that light click, as we're walking through, because again, we've got a lot of years of experience,
Yeah. I think
they don't have
make a great point there too. I think, as we are mentoring and we're kind of having those light bulb moments with people, it also just reminds me of how my career has gone. And I always think, like, you have to give people a little bit of grace too, because we all have a bad day. And so in those moments where, we're doing these teachable moments, and like you said, the light bulb goes on and you think, like, this was just, you just went in the wrong direction. And, you have to give people grace to come back on track. And I think that happens so much. And it's also one of those moments for me where I talk to someone and they're like, thank you so much for just taking the time to call me and say, hey, I'm an appraiser too. Let's work this out. And that conversation goes so much further than opening up a book sometimes and trying to point them to that written answer. So I think you're spot on there. I think it's so much more than just the educational. It's a lot of the peer aspect and really just passing our knowledge from one another constantly. That's how I've always learned from other industry professionals.
Yep. And the best lessons have come from people who have given you that grace. Where
right, exactly.
I've been through those other people who say, this is just how it needs to be done, do it.
Right.
And I didn't learn anything,
Same here.
So, yeah. Love that.
Along those lines, who maybe is one person that comes to mind that was an individual? Maybe you would call them a mentor, maybe you call them a guide, but they really helped reinforce or maybe mold or inspire you to become someone who could do the same for somebody else. Now, I'm not saying it's just any one person. You might like 7 might come to mind, but like maybe what's the first one, or maybe 1 or 2 that come to mind, and what was it about them? What was that experience?
Yeah, I can jump on that first. I worked for Jeff Hogan, who people in this industry know. He's a longstanding appraiser, and I actually just saw him in Las Vegas, and I told him that it's kind of like I worked for him, and he taught me so much in the period of time that I worked for him, from a perspective of that outside of the box thinking, where it really was looking at every property differently and from a neutral standpoint. And I think I said this on our call last time, Michael, that it's that repeatable and defendable, he always used to say to me. And I say it to this day to everyone I talk to when we're talking about a complex file. It's got to be repeatable. It's got to be defendable. So I would say that was during that period of time where I really wanted to get my license, and he probably, influenced that the most at the time. And since then I've had a lot of different mentors, but I always come back to just really thinking about that probably had the biggest impact with working for him.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Stacey.
Rick, comes to mind for you?
I've got two.
First, at least.
My first one is my original trainer, mentor, boss, Larry Ritter. He gave me such a good foundation, really good principles, really brought me in. I remember a story he told that when he started appraising, this was before licensing, and what was it, the FHA or VA office, something, they were, they had reviewed some of his reports and they wanted him, they were said, we're kind of done with you. And he said, let me figure out what to do. And he rode around with their appraisers, their head inspector for like 2 weeks, and he was able to gather, what he was doing, figure out what he was doing wrong, and became one of the most well-respected FHA and VA appraisers in our area, and that story always kept me humble as an appraiser, that I don't know near enough that, I'm all that, that was number one. And then, when I went to work for my second job, I was there a year or so, and they hired Alan Hummel, and Alan came in, and just his ability to simplify, what you're looking at, and it was just amazing. And then his energy, I mean, it was absolutely insane. Even to this day, when you talk to Alan about appraisers and appraisals, it's a different level, and he's always, I've been to USPAP classes, I've been to continuing education, and sometimes, man, it's hard to keep your eyes open. But when I attend something that he teaches or, tells me about, it's a whole different ballgame. It's so engaging. I can't speak highly enough of Alan and what he, how he taught me to share my experiences and knowledge with other appraisers.
Yeah, it's amazing how that benefit of a person or persons who really plant seeds in our lives in some capacity or another are the beneficiaries of seeing the seeds that get planted on trees that they never planted. It's that beautiful ability that you get to be a part of something that you have no idea where it's going to go and how it's going to grow. So phenomenal, so phenomenal. And Stacey, I think one thing I recall that you had shared about, because in a certain way, kind of similar to Rick, both of you had an opportunity to be around commercial and residential valuation.
Yeah.
And both of you ultimately chose the pathway of residential. What do you, I mean, I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway for everybody else's benefit. In case they, for some reason, did not get the opportunity to hear your original recording, how is it that you came to really love and embrace residential over commercial?
That's a good question and a lengthy question. I think it's hard to sum up, but I do think during that repurchase time, and I started looking more at the borrower behind these residential properties versus the commercial properties. And not that commercial properties don't have an impact on people's lives and all of that, but I started really feeling more of that personal connection to the borrowers that are going through these purchases and refis and cash outs, and what their general idea was of what they were doing. And that really started to push me towards the residential more so than anything. And I truly just love structures, and I like seeing different people's homes. I like seeing what they do with their space, and everybody is so different. And there's so much interesting stuff that you come across when you're appraising. And I just think from a residential standpoint, it changed how it was. And I also really like to talk to people. So going and talking to a borrower, and, you'd have these conversations, and it was like you're just meeting somebody new every single day. It kind of pushed me in that other direction. And, not that I don't have a spot in my heart for commercial. I think residential kind of changed my perspective a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. How about you, Rick?
Well, mine comes down to my attention span.
Appreciate that. Know what you know.
Yeah, I like today. I sit down for a 2.5 hour movie. I'm like, sit down for a 20-minute episode or something. I'm like, yes, and I'll watch 10 in a row. So it comes out longer in the end. But, when we were doing commercial, it was interesting. We go out and spend a lot of time just writing a neighborhood description. And I'm like, man, I want to move on to something else. I want to, and for as mundane as residential can be, you're in a different house, every day. And it is a little bit different, even though you're doing the same thing day after day. But I can say going back to that is that, it gave me a better understanding of USPAP and what I can and can't do. And it really gave me, some of the things that we don't think about in residential appraising, but I think are super important. It gave me a respect for that, like the neighborhood description. When I was spending so much time, why is it so important? Well, you're setting the reader up for what you're going to be doing on the next page. It's like a book, you introduce the main characters, kind of move through. And that gave me an appreciation for, writing a good neighborhood description so that they know if they read the report like they're supposed to, that what I'm doing on the next page, with my comp selection is because of what I've started on, and what I've described on page 1 of the report. So, yes, definitely a special place in my heart. Could I have ever done it? No, I would have never been a very good commercial appraiser.
Oh, absolutely. Love that. Love that. Well, here's one of the lovely opportunities that we get with an openly structured and kind of free form conversation like this. And that is, Rick, is there any particular question you'd love to ask Stacy? And conversely, is there any particular question, Stacy, you'd love to ask Rick? I mean, we get the beauty of peers connecting in this case. So you're like, hi, Rick, pleasure to meet you for the first time. Hi, Stacy, pleasure to meet you. Seen your name, haven't met you before. But anything you'd love to know, Rick? I mean, Stacy is a body of knowledge, and if she doesn't, she has a lot of nanners that'll probably help her out in the process. So, but anything come to mind?
A lot of things, but not that I'd want to ask in this.
Well, Dan, you don't have to ask it here, then. We definitely can end the recording and stick around for a little bit longer.
No, Stacy. Yeah, Stacy. I am just, curious, the appraisals that you see every day, and what you're seeing on a national level, and your experiences of, because I think that this is important. I kind of talked about it a little bit, is how you view appraising today, knowing what you know about a national level, as you did when you were working in the local market, if that makes sense. Because I think that that's important, for people to understand when the differences of looking in a local, just this is the only market you've ever known, versus what you see, by being able to view multiple markets, and why it's important for appraisers to give that extra commentary or whatever, from the local market that somebody else may not understand.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I always say to my team, if you are reading a report and you don't understand it, then the next person is not going to understand it at the underwriting. And then the next person at the GSEs is not going to understand it. And that will snowball and keep going. And so even if you're located in a smaller local market, or even just maybe it's not small, it's just a local market and you kind of stick to it, you still have to understand that your readers down the road are not just that borrower and not just, who you turn your appraisal into. It's going to continue with that property forever. And with the amount of data collection that we have going on now in our industry, anything that we put on a report is going to stay. I mean, there's tracking on whether or not you made something a 4-bedroom, but somebody else made it a 3, and then we have to reconcile it 5 to 7 years down the road. It really does depend on the appraiser to know their market and to really make a strong report, because we're not the only ones that are going to see it. Just because that transaction is over does not mean that that data disappears. And it's really important for us as appraisers to know that. And I always say to everybody that is kind of that on my panel that will call me and we'll talk about, I don't know what the issues are in the industry. I say, get out there and start talking to your peers, because the more voices that we have, so come out of the local market and start talking to people and, putting your opinions out there, because the more opinions we have, the stronger this industry is going to be. So, I'd say that's it. The longevity of the data and really kind of pushing yourself out of your local comfort zone and getting out there and going to trade shows and talking to peers and putting your opinion in place, because there's so much going on around us in this industry that, it can make your head spin.
Well, that brings me to two more questions, if you don't mind. What's the longest amount of time? How far back have you seen an appraisal come back to maybe not haunt you, or haunt somebody, but how far back has an appraisal come and, to the future? If that makes sense. I mean, that's a hard
it does. Yeah. I mean, I'm having some that are coming back for people and are roughly around 2 years. That's usually about the length of the longest that I've seen as of recently. And I think that's really truly because the nature of our market has gone up and down and up and down. And in the past couple of years, there's just so much fluctuation to everything that there's questions that are raising. But I'd say it's probably been about 2 years. It's the longest that I've seen for some of the repurchases.
I saw one actually here recently that was 6 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Past USPEP requirements, of how long you got to keep your records. And that's why I asked, and put that out there for people to understand is, when you said, down the road, you meant down the road.
Yep, down the road. It's not next month.
Yep. So, very interesting. And then, I'm going to follow this up with another question. I'd like to get your opinion and, kind of where you think the industry is going with the appraisal modernization, what you think of it, where it's going. And I'll be glad to chime in my thoughts too. I wanted to get yours first. You can't just leave her out on that one. I mean, we got to jump on that string line together.
Yeah, that appraisal modernization is a really big, important thing to me. I have been a part of the hybrid and bifurcated kind of models and prior roles. I believe in the data collector, proportion of it. I think that there is structured training and guidance on it. And I don't think that we're eliminating this profession by expanding our knowledge base and our technology behind it. I'm excited to see where it's going. And I think that we're really trying to grow this industry. And the more that we modernize, the more we're going to grow, because it really will kind of spike that interest for people who are like, well, what do appraisers do? And they start to see this technology and they start to see how we're adapting our process. And I think that brings in a new, fresh kind of perspective of people who want to be appraisers. And don't get me wrong, I love a good measuring wheel and, taking photos. Like, I would probably still measure with my measuring wheel if I had it. But I think that some of the stuff that's happening in this industry is so interesting. Automation and taking away some of the manual aspects so that we can get out and do more business and we can look at more houses and we can do faster valuations and get people into homes faster. I just think it's so cool. And I get very excited about that, obviously, because I think we're just on the cusp of just greatness altogether. We just kind of have to get unified.
I absolutely love that answer because I have been the same. We talked about it when I talked to Michael the first time. One of my things is that, I've been doing this since the early 90s. And for as much as everybody says things have changed, only thing that has really changed is the putting the report together. The actual appraisal process has not changed in 30 years. Really, I mean, if you want to look back, it's not changed much in the last probably 40, 50 years. Yes, we have access to digital photos now. Yes, we have access to online maps, things like that. The software is better. We do get more information, but what we do with it hasn't really changed in a very long time. And, sitting behind your desk, I know sitting behind my desk, I'll pick up the phone to call an appraiser. 9 times out of 10, no matter what time of the day I call, they're out in the field inspecting the property.
Right.
And are they doing, what's the meat of what we do? It's the valuation. And if they're spending all day out in the field, gathering photos, inspecting properties, when are they doing the valuation? When they get home at night, when they're tired, they've been exhausted all day. And, now I'm calling them at 7 o'clock at night. Where's my appraisal? Oh, you'll have it by 11. And then they've got another one. And that's where I think that we as an industry have to trust where we're going. Because I think I'm with you. I think it's great. I'm super excited about where it's going. Gives us a chance to be the experts that we're supposed to be. And, for all the liability and everything that everybody talks about, I mean, when you're putting an appraisal together, you're relying on 3, 5, 6 sales that come from less data than you're going to even get about your subject property.
Right.
You're relying on MLS, and let's be honest, most appraisers don't call and verify and, do all those little things that we were taught 30 years ago. And so now we're getting more data on one of the 6 properties that we're looking at in an appraisal than we've ever gotten before on the other 5.
Right.
I just think, and I think the industry does have some, there's going to be a few growing pains with the inspections. I like where they're going, but I really think that, as this process evolves, the consistency of the data, the accuracy of the data, the amount of data is going to be so superior to what we're getting today, that it's going to make the process that much better. And I understand appraiser as well. I do a great job. I'm out there, I'm measuring. I get that. And there are appraisers who can collect that data and, do a great job and, verify everything, but that's you, another great appraiser who does the same thing is going to catch something that you didn't, because there's no consistency. The only training that we've ever got is from our mentors on the inspection piece. And that changes, from generation to generation, appraiser to appraiser. There's no consistency there. And it brings a consistency that the industry's never had. And I really like that idea. So,
yeah,
all right, I get all excited about talking appraisal modernization. I really do.
You and me both. We'll just continue to talk about modernization. Yeah. People will be like, what is going on here?
What is all about? Stacey, how about for you? Any particular question for Rick?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what comes to mind the most, because I think from my perspective, as we get into these positions where we're in these mentor roles, I'm curious what you think is kind of your biggest challenge right now with the appraisers that you work with, and what kind of things you're working with them to improve on. And maybe it's changing the perspective of the modernization or changing perspective on how to do things. But I'm just curious what your bigger challenges are right now.
Well, I'm going to bring up a bad word. Bias, I think, is the big one.
Oh my gosh, you said, I know.
With Freddie Mac coming out and, actually providing some actual words and phrases, and with their failure to their SSRs when you upload through UCDP, no longer warnings, they're actually failing. It's become an issue with appraisers and understanding the changes that are made. And it's hard for me because, I've been around for a long time, and there are words that, were taught when I started appraising that, gentrification is one that you can't, is a word that you're not, and that was a big part of what, of my initial learning. I mean, I remember hearing about it in appraisal classes. So, that's one of the things that I think that we struggle with as an industry, and we're so opposed to change that, we automatically knee-jerk throw the fit. Well, this is just, ridiculous. And I get that, but I also get that there's ways to explain certain things that are more factual. Interesting, I had a discussion with my daughter. She's an environmental scientist and works down here in Florida. And she was talking about, we were kind of talking about this subject and how people reacted. And she said, well, you're writing a report that's supposed to be facts, da-da-da-da-da-da. And she goes, what we learned is when we're doing, there's 2 things that they do. They do their studies and they present their facts, and then they present papers on it with their opinions, And she said that they steer away from using certain words because they're not, they seem like fact, but they're not. Desirable is one. Rather than saying desirable, they put down, here are the results, and these results equal this. Rather than using these are desirable results.
Yeah.
So that's it's a sticky and tough topic, but I think it is something that we as an industry have to address. And we need to be on top of it and be working towards being better. So I'd love to get
I completely agree.
anything additional you might have on that. It's hard to talk about, it really is.
It really is, but I agree with you. I think it kind of takes that, thought process that I was having earlier about, people coming out and giving their opinions and having open conversations. And I think that's really important that we have open conversations about the changes and the things that are happening in our industry, but doing it in a way that's professional and it's neutral, and we all are able to present our opinions and not be kind of aggressive about it. I think that's what we need to be doing as an industry, is highlighting how we feel about it, but also, taking some of that, tension away, and that could help quite a bit. But I have a follow-up question then, because I'm really intrigued, because I like to ask other appraisers this. If you had the opportunity and you were talking to a trainee about, your career, what key piece of advice would you give for a new trainee kind of coming up into the industry?
You got my final question, Stacey. That's impressive.
I've read your mind.
You're flexible. This is an exciting time, I think, to become an appraiser, because there's not a clear path of what you're going to look like 10 years from now. I agree with you. I don't think the appraisal profession is going away. I think that we may change a little bit in how we do things and where our role is in the process, but I can't ever see a way that we get away from humans interpreting the data, because we're dealing with transactions that are human driven, and so I say, there's an opportunity, don't get discouraged today. Don't listen to a lot of the rhetoric that you hear, the appraisal industry, it's dying industry. You don't want to be a part of it. Oh, this is the exciting time to be in, and work hard to gain those relationships with, people who've been around a while, because you have the opportunity now to put your footprint on what it's going to look like more than any other time in the history of our appraisals. You and I both want to lead this industry having put our footprint on it. We will, in small little pieces, but somebody coming in today has the ability to really help, transform to what we're going to be doing and what it is, 10 years down the road, 15, 20, 25. This is an exciting time to be on that front end of the appraisal industry. And, I think there's opportunities for people who are willing to change, they've got a great place that they're heading to.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And Stacey, for you, how do you answer that question?
Oh, you had to bring it back to me, huh?
Oh, of course. I mean, you got I was like, this is a great question. I'm like, oh, wow. She's like, we're this so aligned. The synergy there.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, network. Like you said, connections, and be honest. Be honest about the things that you like in this profession and the things that you don't like, because, a lot of people really like to sit, at a desk and they do reviews, and some people want to be out, like you said, in the nature, walking around and taking measurements. But be honest with yourself about kind of which part of this industry you want to be in, and, grow it, be willing to grow in different directions. You might start out as an appraiser, as independent appraiser, and you might end up working for an AMC, or you might end up working for a lender. So I say that, to a lot of people that are trying to get into the profession, is be willing to grow and be willing to adapt and be willing to take the losses, because not every day is, sunshine and roses, but, take the losses, learn from them, and just kind of keep moving forward. And we become stronger for it as an industry. And as you're doing it, just network. I think it's super important that we build these relationships and keep conversations going. And like you said, that somebody could be coming in the profession right now and could change the face of our industry in such an impactful way that I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see some of these thought makers come out of the next kind of, career building of our diversity. And I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. And I think that, you hit it on the head there with networking and the opportunities, because going through this and growing up, in my appraiser life, everything was centered around residential, doing the 1004, and I concentrated mostly on GSE work, origination, there's review, and I did a little bit of that, delved into some other areas, but it's just a different branch of appraising. I think you hit it on the head where, the opportunities, I think that there's going to be opportunities to have, just inspections. You like that, you enjoy that, you can become that and be a professional at that, or the valuation portion, or a review portion, or I see potential for reconciliation where, you're taking 3 different approaches to value, whether it be an ADM, valuation from an appraiser, or a BPO, and putting them all together and making sense of all that data. There's just so many opportunities, and somebody with a great business mind who understands the process from start to finish has those opportunities to branch out, and do all 3 or all 4 or all 6 lines of different things. And, just not, now that I'm too old to know any better, if I could go back, I would, that is one thing that I would do, would branch out and see, where can, what are the different things that I can do here, and, be a part of it all, rather than, a linear line focus. Really build business and not just be, a basement appraiser.
And, for some of those hermits, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But no. Stacey, as you touched on, with more technology, there's more opportunity to stay in the basement.
Right. That's true. I mean, some people love that, and that's fine. Everybody has their own path. I think you just have to like what path you're on, and I think that's what people sometimes forget, is being an appraiser is not just being an appraiser. There are hundreds of roles that impact this industry, and you can start out one direction and you might end up another. And I always say that, when somebody says to me, I'm going to get my license and I want to be a chief appraiser, it's like, well, you're probably going to want to be about 12 other things in the interim between getting your license and being a chief appraiser to keep going. Because you have to crawl before you walk, and walk before you run. Yep. So I think we all are experiencing the same thing.
That is definitely the case. Well, Rick, Stacey, I am so grateful for you all making some time today to join us here with our PahRooZings Pub Chats here. Just an opportunity to connect and share amongst some individuals who've been around multiple areas of the profession and have a lot of perspective to be able to share for the benefit of others who ongoingly and increasingly really get a lot of value out of these podcast recordings, so that they can hear for themselves, like, wow, I didn't even know that was available, or holy cow, look at some other options that might be there, or hey, maybe I should go invest in cell towers, like Rick said. Like, I don't know what you got out of this, but the ability to be helping others help others is what makes this so genuinely enjoyable. So again, if you haven't shared this, please hit that share button and feel free to continue to pass along the great feedback. Thank you for all the encouragement, and thank you for making a difference out there. Rick and Stacey, on behalf of the PahRooZings Power Values podcast, thank you both for being part of this.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of PahRooZings, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of PahRooZings, Appraisers on Purpose. Create the change that you seek.